you start late-term aborting children or aborting them after they've been born, that's nuts.
Aborting them after they've been born?
Yes.
You think that's happening?
It is. It does.
I don't think that's happening.
Well,
aborting children after they're born wouldn't be called abortion, though, right?
Well, they still call it abortion.
What would they? That would be called murder.
Well, not according to the left.
Look, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I was told don't believe anything you read on the internet. Now it seems that people believe everything they read on the internet, and you can see that here.
That's 4 weeks after they're born, you can kill them.
I'm sorry, I gotta take a moment here. You're saying that in California you can kill a newborn baby up to 4 weeks until after it's born?
Absolutely.
That's not true.
That is true.
That's not true.
That's the law in the last year or two.
That is not true. That's not true.
You need to go do your research.
That's 100% not true.
You need to do your
research. Where did you read that? Be honest.
National news media.
Post-birth abortion. Can you tell me where you read it?
It's been a while.
I've read it so many places I can't name them all, no.
It's hard to name them all right now.
Yeah, it is.
Post-birth abortions. What are we talking about? What are we doing here? This is something the right has been running with for years. But when pressed on it, they can't seem to provide any evidence. They say they read it somewhere, and they can't even prove where they read it. Trump, of course, likes to talk about it in speeches. He's talked about it in media appearances.
It must be remembered that the Democrats are the radical ones on this position because they support abortion up to and even beyond the 9th month. The concept of having an abortion in the later months and even execution after birth, and that's exactly what it is. The baby is born, the baby is executed after birth, is unacceptable.
He claims it's for sure happening, but don't you think for a second, if it was, let's just imagine, if there were post-birth abortions, a single doctor, a single nurse, anywhere would have evidence that it was happening, would talk about it, would come forward and say, yes, this is happening all over the place. I've seen it with my own eyes. Instead, we get secondhand accounts and people saying they read it somewhere and encouraging you to do your research. I don't know where to research that. I don't know where to go to research that it definitively is happening everywhere, that doctors are just killing babies after they're born, and to quote Trump, sometimes weeks after they're born. Let's be real here. Of course that's not happening. It's a myth, and it's a distraction from their unpopular abortion policies. And you can see that in Vance's polling.
There's something comparable, between abortion and slavery.
This is one of the great tricks that I think the sexual revolution pulled on the American populace, which is this idea that these marriages were fundamentally, they were maybe even violent, but certainly they were unhappy. And so getting rid of them and making it easier for people to shift spouses like they change their underwear, that's going to make people happier in the long term.
I certainly would like abortion to be illegal nationally. Let's say Roe versus Wade is overruled. And then, every day, George Soros sends a 747 to Columbus to load up disproportionately black women to get them to go have abortions in California. And of course, the left will celebrate this as a victory for diversity.
This guy thinks there's a comparison between abortion and slavery. Of course there's not. Slavery is a unique evil. It's a stain on humanity. And the fact that he so easily makes that comparison shows just how weird and radical they are. And those views are wildly out of step with most Americans.
Well, according to an ABC News Ipsos poll taken at the end of July, Donald Trump's running mate, JD Vance, is the first VP nominee to have a net negative favorability coming right out of his party's convention.
Even right out of the gate, JD Vance is uniquely unpopular among vice presidential nominees. And it's because he's so unpopular with women for views like this. And Trump is no different. Of course, people have rightfully made the case for years that women should not support Trump because his policies are detrimental to women. Most notably, he is responsible for the overturning of Roe because he appointed Supreme Court justices like this.
I think the court's doing a pretty good job, I'll be honest with you, Sandra. You ask us to decide the 70 hardest cases in the country every year, cases where the lower courts have disagreed, and there are 9 of us. Can you get 9 of your colleagues to agree on where to go to lunch? Right?
No.
And we've been appointed by 5 different presidents over 30 years. Yeah. And we are able to reach a unanimous judgment in these hard cases about 40% of the time. Do you hear that? Now, that's the same figure as it was in about 1945 when Franklin Roosevelt had appointed 8 of the 9 justices of the Supreme Court.
For a court that is supposed to be impartial and look at cases objectively, going on the most partisan cable network in the country does really undermine that whole sentiment. And these MAGA justices are the same ones that are pushing back against any ethics reform for the court. Even the possibility of a code of ethics for the Supreme Court is driving them to anger. And again, these are the same justices who are accepting millions of dollars in gifts from billionaires. These are people who have a direct stake in the outcome of cases, and they're effectively being bribed. You have a stronger code of ethics for a dog warden than the Supreme Court. How much further does the corruption problem need to fester at the Supreme Court before somebody on the right finally recognizes there is a problem here? But of course they won't, because right now it's set up that they'll have a 6-3 majority, maybe even 7-2 or worse if Trump wins, for the remainder of their lifetimes. And on the Supreme Court, they do just the bare minimum to appear to the casual observer that they are an impartial body.
The U.S. Supreme Court now refusing to delay former President Trump's sentencing in his New York criminal trial until after the election. Trump says he did nothing wrong and plans to appeal the conviction on all 34 counts of falsifying business records. He is facing possible prison time or a fine at the sentencing, now set for the 18th of September. So a little more than a month from now, we'll keep track of that.
So just this week, they refused to delay sentencing in his Manhattan criminal case. He wanted it pushed until after the election. And of course, that is a super specific, hyper-partisan move that they could have indulged, but they opted not to. And it's moments like this where it just gives a little bit of credence to the court, and you'll say, okay, well, sure, Trump took an L there. And then you look at everything else they've given him, from immunity to completely overhauling the regulatory state to ballot access. Those are colossal wins that help further his legitimacy as a corrupt politician. So while some people might be celebrating that this isn't delayed, it kind of pales in comparison. We need to be honest with ourselves and with each other about what we want the country to look like, how we want our system to work, and how we want our Supreme Court to behave. Because a system where the powerful are not held to account, and that includes Supreme Court justices, only guarantees a future where the corrupt run amok, where misinformation like post-birth abortion flourishes. And not only that, it's how Republicans govern under a false premise. And they use that type of language and that misinformation to further regulate people's bodies, to take away your freedoms, to deny you of your rights, and ultimately to destroy democracy.